Whatever happens between now and the end of his time as a professional cricketer, Virat Kohli will go down as having enjoyed one of the most significant careers in the game's history. A genuine superstar who achieved levels of global fame unmatched by any other cricketer in the social media age. There is a decent case to be made that Kohli is the greatest ODI batter of all time. He averages 57 at a strike rate of 94 across his 271 game career and is on course to smash Sachin Tendulkar's all-time record of 49 ODI hundreds. In T20 cricket, Kohli enjoyed one of the all-time great IPL campaigns in 2016 and is responsible for two of the most famous T20 World Cup innings ever, his Mohali knock against Australia in 2016 and his unbeaten 81 against Pakistan in 2022. And despite the occasional question mark around his strike rate, he averages an astonishing 52.73 at a strike rate of 137.96 in T20Is. For a long time, Kohli has been the flag bearer of Test cricket, regularly asserting that despite the rise of the IPL and T20 cricket more generally, Test cricket remains the game's most important format. Kohli has achieved great things in Test cricket, which makes his extraordinary centuryless run, which spanned from November 2019 to March 2023, all the more perplexing. Before his century against Australia at Ahmedabad, the former India captain last scored a Test 100 before the world had heard of COVID-19. The 23 Test streak without 100 represents more than a fifth of his entire Test career. For a player who for so long reigned supreme, it's an extraordinary run. So, what was behind this slump, and how rare is it for a great player to go through such a run? And how should it affect his legacy as a Test match batter? First, let's focus on the positives. How great was Kohli at his peak? Unfortunately, given the extent of the slump, barring a remarkable turn of events, Kohli's peak has to now be referred to in the past tense. After he scored his 27th Test 100 against Bangladesh in 2019, the then India captain averaged a staggering 54.97 from 84 Test matches. At the end of 2019, Kohli's average was the 12th highest of all time among players with more than 4,000 Test runs. Fast forward 3 and a bit years and Kohli has plummeted down that list. In March 2023, prior to the Ahmedabad Test, Kohli averaged 48.12 and found himself 39th on that same list. In that second list, Kohli is still surrounded by excellent players, but they're not quite in the same calibre of that first bunch. Kohli's peak really was quite something. Over 55 tests between October 2014 and the end of 2019, Kohli averaged 63.65. During this time, he averaged more than 40 in every country he batted in more than once. He enjoyed some truly outstanding individual series. In 2014-15, Kohli averaged 86.50 in a 2-0 series loss in Australia, scoring 400 from as many games. In 2016, Kohli averaged 109 as India demolished Alistair Cook's England 4-0, a series that would end up being Cook's last as England captain. 18 months later, Kohli averaged 59 in England, the scene of his well-documented troubles against Anderson and the moving ball in 2014. In India's low-scoring series defeat in South Africa in 2018 against an attack that included Dale Steyn, Lungi Ngidi, Morne Morkel, Kagiso Rabada and Vernon Philander, Kohli was the series' leading run scorer, averaging 47.66, the only Indian top 7 batter to average more than 30. Against spin, express pace and the swinging ball, Kohli thrived. The extent of Kohli's dominance is perhaps best demonstrated by his positioning in the ICC's Test batting rankings, which takes into account the relative scores of other players in the games that each individual competes in. Kohli's peak rating of 937 is the joint 11th highest of all time, a mere 10 rating points of Steve Smith in second place. Kohli was putting together a compelling case to be regarded as one of the best batsmen since Don Bradman. He spent 4.5 years, from November 2016 to the summer of 2021, firmly in the top 5 in the world rankings. He had amassed 27 Test 100s, having just turned 31. Given the rate with which he churned out 100 after 100, Kohli was on course to finish his career in the top 3 century makers in the history of Test cricket. But instead, Kohli remained planted on 27 Test 100s for 3.5 years. Now, there are worse places to be stuck, but seeing the progress of the other Fab Four members in that time, including Joe Root, it makes you think what could have been. Since Kohli's 27th Test 100 in 2019, Root has scored 13 Test 100s to Kohli's 1, which takes us on to Kohli's slump, a 23 Test run without 100. a run of games that lasted longer than the entire Test careers of George Headley, Shane Bond and Mohammad Asif. Before we get into the whys of Kohli's slump, it's worth saying that late career declines are not abnormal. Players very rarely call it a day at their peaks, so more often than not finish their career with averages below levels previously reached. There are several examples of greats of the game finishing their careers after relative declines. Ricky Ponting averaged 59.99 after 107 tests, but finished his Australia career 6 years later with a final average of 51.85. Having retained his place in a dwindling Australia team while his own returns waned as the years went by. Ponting's slump wasn't actually that extreme. He averaged 40.14 across his final 59 tests. Maintaining an average in the high 50s is just really hard. Similarly, Rahul Dravid averaged 58.75 after 104 tests in the summer of 2006, but that number would fall down to 52.31, and that was despite scoring 500s in his last full year of Test cricket. Sachin Tendulkar averaged 58.87 after 90 tests and ended his career with an average of 53.78. Going back even further, there are some more extreme examples. The great Australian Harvey averaged 61.73 after 39 tests. He averaged 48.41 when he retired, having averaged 36 across his final 40 test matches. What Kohli endured though is more dramatic than all of those examples. He had gone from averaging 55 across his entire career to just 25 over a 23 test spell. Ponting had a 33% drop in output, Harvey had a 47% drop in output, but for Kohli it was a 53% drop. If you're talking slumps though, nothing quite compares to Jimmy Adams. The West Indies left-hander of the 1990s had a barnstorming start to his career, averaging 66.10 after his first 24 tests. Adams, however, would only score one more Test 100 from his final 30 Test matches, finishing his career with an average of 41, averaging 25.80 from those final 30 games, a whopping 62% fall in output. But Adams was not in the calibre of Kohli. How did Kohli go from being one of the best since Bradman to having one of the worst records of established batters in the world? There are 18 players who have scored 20 or more Test hundreds in the middle order in the 21st century. Discounting weights for their first Test hundreds, none have endured anything like the slump Kohli went through. Kohli's century-less run is the joint longest on the list. Tendulkar's run came at the very, very end of his career, while Chanderpaul's was in the early phase of his West Indies career, between his second and third Test hundreds. Most of those longer streaks, Root, Lara and Dravid aside, came in either the early or final days of a career. So in a way, Kohli's is the most dramatic, especially considering it started when he'd only just turned 31, generally regarded as an age during which batters are at their peak. So how did this strange and most surprising of streaks occur? The streak began just before the pandemic took over the world. A short and sharp series against a New Zealand side that would go on to lift the first ever World Test Championship trophy just over a year later. The Black Caps won an extremely low scoring series 2-0. There was just one team score above 250 across the two tests, and only Kane Williamson scored more than 60 in a single innings. Kohli was not alone in his struggles. Then came the pandemic. Border-Gavaskar Trophy in Australia was India's next task. Kohli would only feature in the first test, missing the rest of the series for paternity leave. Kohli was the only India player to pass 50 in either innings in their defeat to Adelaide, but given the nature of their second innings collapse and the drama around their eventual series victory, it's an often forgotten performance. One that was only ended by a mix-up with a man who'd captained India to that famous series win, Ajinkya Rahane. Up next, England at home. Beginning of a 9-test run that saw India either play England or play in England. Once more, Kohli started the series with a battling half-century in defeat. Joe Root's 218 and Jimmy Anderson's final day heroics saw England claim a thumping victory at Chennai to go 1-0 up in the series. Kohli scoring 72 in the second innings was one of just 2 India players to pass 15 in that innings. Pitches were not quite as fun to bat on over the course of the rest of the series, however. England, after scoring 578 in the first innings of the series, wouldn't again pass 205. There is an argument to be made that the World Test Championship has incentivised the production of pitches more likely to lead to results. As explored in another of our videos, India's defeat at Chennai is their only loss at home on a pitch not rated poor by the ICC in the last decade. But draws on flatter pitches at Kanpur against New Zealand in 2021 and against Australia in Ahmedabad in 2023 had the potential to jeopardise their World Test Championship prospects had results elsewhere gone against them. Kohli only scored 150 over the next 6 innings in the series, but to be fair to him, Rishabh Pant was the only player from either side to pass 50 more than twice across the series. So far, the streak is 7 tests long, and Kohli averages 24 across this period, which doesn't compare too badly to the others to have played in this period. Over these 7 tests, 6 have been really quite low scoring, and only 200s have been scored by anyone from what were generally regarded as the 4 best teams in the world at the time. Next up, the 2021 English Summer, the World Test Championship, and a series against Joe Root's England in England. In a rain-affected low-scoring World Test Championship final, Kohli scores 44 for 132 and 13 in the second innings as India are bowled out for 170 as Williamson's team become the first ever World Test champions. That is now 7 out of 8 tests since the start of 2020 that were noticeably low scoring. Another test match where no one passes 55, let alone 100. Now, the England series that followed was played on a set of excellent cricket wickets. Batters were capable of piling on the runs, but bowlers were always in the hunt as well. Kohli is dismissed for a first baller to his nemesis Anderson in the opener at Trent Bridge as the rain saves England from defeat. At Lords, he scores a battling 40 in the first innings and 20 in the second before he masterminded their remarkable final day assault on a shell-shocked England to go 1-0 up. Even if Kohli the batsman wasn't quite at his best, he was still having an influence as captain. He then scores 7 and 55 in defeat at Leeds and then 50 and 44 in victory at the Oval. He finished the series without a standout score, but after putting in a number of quietly important contributions, though his series average of 27.66 was the 6th best among the Indian batters. He was then rested for the first test at home to New Zealand. In the second, he fell for 0 and 36 in his sole appearance in the series in a game that saw Ajaz Patel claim a 10-fer and New Zealand bowled out for 62 in their first innings. Next up, South Africa away, and you guessed it, another low-scoring series, as India encounter South Africa's impressive battery of fast bowlers. Kohli hit 35 and 18 in the opening win at Centurion before missing the second test at the Wanderers with a back spasm. Back in time for the series decider at Cape Town, Kohli played arguably the best knock of his centuryless run. The first innings 79, only he and Pujara passed 30, as India were bowled out for 223. In the second innings, he only scored 29, but stayed at the crease for over 3 hours as he played second fiddle as Pant played one of the innings of the year. Another series ends without a Kohli 100, but it's hardly a bad series either. He's the only batter aside from Vihari who only played 1 test match to average more than 40. A few weeks later at home to Sri Lanka, there is just 1 team total above 305 across the series, although this time several India batters, notably Jadeja, Pant and Iyer, fare well. In late 2022, India made a short trip to Bangladesh and prevailed in a hard-fought 2-match series. Really, this is the only series in the centuryless run you can put down as Kohli having a stinker. He failed to reach 25 in any of his 4 innings in the series as other Indian batters made hay. Shreyas Iyer continued his fine form in Asian conditions, Pujara broke his own century duck, and Shubman Gill registered his first Test 100. Even Kuldeep Yadav scored 40 in the first innings of the series. Kohli's run without a century now spanned 20 tests with Australia about to come to town. He'd finally broken his run without scoring 100 across formats earlier in the 2021-2022 season, scoring 100 against Afghanistan in the Asia Cup. It signalled a return of Kohli somewhere near his best in white ball cricket. He soon produced his MCG class against Pakistan, and in ODI cricket he was back to his relentless best, scoring 300s across 6 games against Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. But that 28 Test 100 remained elusive. First 3 pitches in the Australia series were very spin friendly, with the third at indoor especially so. The surfaces were awarded ratings of average and poor by the ICC. Rohit Sharma was the only player to score 100 from either team across those first 3 tests. The streak can now stretch to 23 test matches after 3 more games played in bowler-friendly conditions. And then in the grand setting of the enormous Narendra Modi Stadium at Ahmedabad, on a pitch that would have been customary in India not so long ago, Kohli reached 3 figures for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, especially for someone who had achieved so much before. While it's fair to point out that among the 21st century's top middle-order players, a run this long at this stage of his career is basically unprecedented. But so were the conditions faced by Kohli in this run, an abnormal, in historic terms at least, concentration of the test matches he played in were in conditions that bowlers dominated. Kohli, like all modern-day cross-format internationals, hardly plays first-class cricket outside the Test arena. Long gone are the days of acclimatisation periods, with most series too short to play yourself into. He's not the only India player to struggle either. He averages marginally more than Pujara and almost 10 runs per dismissal more than Rahane in tests involving Kohli since the start of 2020. But equally, Pant and Test newbie Iyer have fared better than Kohli. And while conditions haven't been easy, they've not been impossible to score big runs in. In the 9 test matches that Root and Kohli have played in together during this period, Root has scored 500s to Kohli's 0. So where does that leave his overall legacy as a test batter? Well, out of that list of the 18 most prolific middle-order batters of the 21st century referenced above, he doesn't feature particularly highly on a few metrics. His average, for example, is towards the bottom of the list. He features quite low on the list in terms of overall test average. In terms of how many innings it takes for him to score 100, he's pretty high on the list still despite that run. The number of innings per 50, he is much lower on the list. At the time of recording, Kohli's average is the 4th lowest on the list. There could of course be plenty of time for Kohli to make amends for the last 3.5 years. This summer's World Test Championship final provides the biggest stage in them all to put in a landmark performance, and Kohli will still only be 34 going into the next World Test Championship cycle. But the extent of his slump that basically represents between a fifth and a quarter of his entire career, to hit him in what still ought to have been his prime, will surely affect how his Test career is remembered.